Well, depending on your perspective, this was entirely predictable and inevitable or completely unexpected. But President Biden has officially announced that he will not be seeking re-election in the upcoming 2024 election. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, this is breaking bombshell news. Just released a few minutes ago by way of an official letter posted on President Biden's official Twitter account. It says, July 21st, 2024, Joseph R. Biden Jr. My fellow Americans, over the past 3.5 years, we've made great progress as a nation. Today, America has the strongest economy in the world. We've made historic investments in rebuilding our nation, in lowering prescription drug costs for seniors, and in expanding affordable care to a record number of Americans. We've provided critically needed care to 1 million veterans exposed to toxic substances, passed the first gun safety law in 30 years, appointed the first African-American woman to the Supreme Court, and passed the most significant climate change legislation in the history of the world. America has never been better positioned to lead than we are today. I know none of this could have been done without you, the American people. Together, we overcame a once-in-a-century pandemic and the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. We protected and preserved our democracy, and we've revitalized and strengthened our alliances around the world. It has been the greatest honor of my life to serve as your president. And while it has been my intention to seek re-election, I believe it's in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down and focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term. I will speak to the nation later this week in more detail about my decision. For now, let me express my deepest gratitude to those who have worked so hard to see me re-elected. I want to thank Vice President Kamala Harris for being an extraordinary partner in all this work. And let me express my heartfelt appreciation to the American people for the faith and trust you've placed in me. I believe today what I always have, that there is nothing America can't do when we do it together. We just have to remember we are the United States of America. Signed, Joe Biden. Folks, this is bombshell. Again, whether or not you thought this was inevitable based on the polling, particularly in the aftermath of the disastrous debate that President Biden had with Donald Trump, or if you thought that the president's assurances, public and private, that he was going to stay the course meant that this was, a sudden change of heart. We don't know, but either way, this is huge because the election is 3.5 months away. So for the party's presumptive nominee to say that actually I'm not seeking re-election, this is huge. This is a potential game changer, and it's very risky. President Biden remaining in the race also constituted a risk, as I've talked about time and time again in previous videos. He has been consistently polling behind Donald Trump, even though the race is in the margin of error. But the polls have not been looking good, particularly in the aftermath of the debate and the debate's coverage by the media. But there is some polling to indicate that Vice President Harris, for example, taking the reins might revitalize the Democratic Party, might inspire donors to turn out, donors who had been previously turned off by the president in the past few weeks. We don't know. It's a gamble either way. There's some data to support this move, other data is not to. I will say, the president says he's going to address the nation more clearly later this week to go into detail. But I do think it's important that he specifically mentions the vice president. I want to thank Vice President Kamala Harris for being an extraordinary partner in all this work, all of the work that he summarizes earlier in the letter. Now, I'm not sure if he's going to endorse her or what he's going to do, direct his delegates to instead vote for her in the upcoming Democratic primary, if he's going to release them and have an open primary, but just offer his personal endorsement of the vice president. But it seems clear to me, based on the rhetoric and the tenor of his letter, that he is moving the vice president up and identifying her as the next heir apparent, the logical next choice. If it's not going to be Biden in the Biden-Harris administration, it should be Harris, the vice president. This makes sense. This is typically, whether you like it or not, how party politics works. This is how government works. The vice president, by definition, their goal is to assist the president. They're the second highest ranking person in the executive branch in their entire constitutional duty, the only constitutional duty they have besides serving as the president of the Senate, which is at this point more of a ceremonial role, right? The vice president is supposed to be a stand-in for the president if they resign or if there's a medical emergency or if the 25th Amendment is invoked. Okay, so it makes sense logically that the president would identify Vice President Harris. So it seems to me, if I were a gambling man, which I'm not, that he is probably going to endorse the vice president in his upcoming speech, which I imagine will be televised. Folks, this is huge. Again, we are in the most consequential election of our lifetimes. We said that about the previous election and the election before that, but it is true. Donald Trump is an authoritarian with no limiting principle, aided and abetted by an authoritarian cult of personality with no limiting principle. And the clock is running out. We have 3.5 months to defeat Donald Trump at the ballot box. Again, I understand that President Biden beat him before. I understand that President Biden has just objectively been a phenomenal president with respect especially to domestic policy. But just because you won the previous race doesn't mean you're going to win the next race. Just because you were a great president doesn't mean you're necessarily a great candidate. So as far as I can tell, this is a risky decision no matter what. Biden staying in, Biden staying out, which is why I haven't particularly opined in either way. I see pros and cons either way, but it doesn't matter. The president has officially made his decision. He will serve out the remainder of his term, but he will not seek re-election. Obviously, as we get more information, we'll talk about it, but I just wanted to release this news to you. Let me know what you think in the comments.